50 years ago, on November 20th, 1975, dictator Francisco Franco died in a hospital bed after weeks of agony. But his death could have happened much earlier, completely changing Spanish history. I'm David Cott, host of New History of Spain, and in this episode we will uncover the times Franco came closest to dying. The first time the Galician faced death was on June 29, 1916, during an assault in the context of the colonial Rif War. Franco was shot in the abdomen, something that at the time usually meant certain death. Some have speculated he even lost a testicle as a result of the wound or his treatment. For 2 weeks, doctors decided not to move him to the military hospital in Ceuta, believing he wouldn't survive the transfer. Against all odds, he eventually recovered. When it comes to assassination attempts, we don't know the exact number, but there were certainly more than a dozen. Most involved anarchists, which isn't surprising given the long history of politically motivated assassinations carried out by the libertarian movement. Here I'm reclaiming the term libertarian, which in English has been appropriated by the far right, but keep in mind that all forms of anarchism are socialist. The first known attempt, and the one that came closest to succeeding, happened just days before the coup planned for July 18, 1936. The main figures were Antonio Tejera and 2 Catalans, Martí Cererols and Antoni Vidal, committed anarchists experienced in action groups. They decided to act after the anarchist federations learned that General Franco, then commanding the Canary Islands, had joined the rumored military uprising. According to Tejera, the plan was devised by Antoni Vidal. To get weapons, they approached the civil governor of Tenerife, Manuel Vázquez Moro of the Republican left. But he refused to participate in killing a general who was in theory loyal to the Republic. They went ahead on their own. A key helper was another Catalan, Maria Culí, a restaurant owner who managed the canteen of the military command in Santa Cruz de Tenerife. On the night of July 14th, the anarchist team entered the residence for soldiers through a trapdoor connecting the canteen to the military quarters. They reached the rooftop and advanced along the corridor until they stood right in front of Franco's bedroom, ready to shoot and escape. But the door was locked. Their attempts to break it failed, and Franco heard them and started shouting for help, which alerted the guards. Soldiers opened fire, and the anarchists managed to flee. Franco's cousin later wrote that in June, the general had been receiving anonymous warnings, leading him to create a trusted personal security detail. Security was tightened even further after the assassination of José Calvo Sotelo, the fascist politician meant to serve as the dictatorship's civilian face. Was the civil governor of Tenerife one of those who warned Franco? Probably, but if so, it was a tragic decision, because Manuel Vázquez was executed by the rebels. Franco's cousin recorded the following incident, which he says took place on July 12th or 13th. Quote, "One evening, several soldiers on duty noticed movement among the trees by the wall of the building. They quickly opened fire, forcing several individuals to flee. There were 3 of them, and they escaped through newly opened streets in the area." Franco, who was already in bed, learned what had happened but didn't give it much importance and continued resting. He was surely confident that his life was being protected with the utmost care. End quote. It refers to the same event, though the stories differ significantly. Did the anarchists actually reach Franco's bedroom door? Was Franco really calm and composed, or was his cousin embellishing his own role as the organizer of Franco's security detail? Clearly someone isn't telling the truth. Some have blamed a supposed traitor who tipped off authorities about the plot. But it seems more likely that the failure resulted simply from the general's increased security in response to vague threats. If there had really been an informant, they would have known the names of the conspirators and arrested them for attempted assassination, which never happened. Even though they weren't caught for that, 3 of them were later arrested for their anarchist activism and suffered the consequences. Maria Culí was sentenced to 16 years in prison, and it's unknown if she survived. Martí Cererols was executed by firing a squad in 1937. Antonio Tejera received a 30-year sentence, was tortured, and later went into exile, but survived to tell his story. Antoni Vidal, a stonemason, hid inside a tomb he had built as a refuge in case things went wrong. After days in hiding, he fled the island by sailboat. During the war, he worked as a spy for the Republic. When the war ended, he took refuge in France with his wife and 6 children, but after the German invasion, his family returned to Spain. He saw no choice but to flee to the United States under a new identity, where he started another family but remained in contact with his relatives in Spain, sending them money regularly. 2 days later, Franco reportedly survived another plot. After the suspicious death of General Amado Balmes, likely ordered by Franco himself, the Galician general used the funeral as a pretext to travel to Gran Canaria. On the ship, a man was arrested for allegedly plotting to kill Franco under orders from the left-wing Popular Front government. 3 more Republicans were accused of planning to blow up the hotel where Franco was staying. All 4 were executed. On July 18th, as Franco prepared to leave Gran Canaria to command the Army of Africa, a group of armed Republicans waited to ambush him in La Laja Tunnel, but he chose to travel by ship instead. The plot was later used to justify the execution of a man in 1959. In Ceuta, on July 17th, Lieutenant Colonel Juan Yagüe released fascists from Falange from prison, and Falangists and legionary units began causing chaos in the streets and proclaimed martial law. That night, 4 Republican corporals plotted to kill Franco upon his arrival in Ceuta. They expected help from other soldiers, but one betrayed them, and about 30 soldiers were arrested. Some were executed by Falangists without even the pretense of a trial. There were also spies like the anarcho-syndicalist Ramon Rufat, who kept close watch on Franco in hopes of killing him if an opportunity arose. One such chance came in June 1937, when General Mola died in a plane crash. Franco attended the funeral, and the Republicans hoped to kill him and several other generals to create a leadership crisis among the rebels and halt the northern offensive. They planned to use bombers to attack the funeral, but despite having accurate intelligence, the Republican Air Force failed to act. During the Battle of the Ebro, Republican spies also passed along information about Franco's movements, but no decisive action was ever taken. Franco's intelligence services, in turn, received reports of more than a dozen assassination plots during the war. Foreign powers also considered eliminating Franco. Stalin tried through Kim Philby, a British spy working for the Soviet Union. Officially, Philby entered Spain as a freelance journalist, but his real mission was to study Franco's security and plan an assassination. To gain trust, Philby wrote flattering articles about Franco and the fascists. A plan was even drafted to stage a fake interview with Franco in which the photographer would actually be a hitman hiding a gun inside his camera. Some claim Philby lacked the nerve to go through with it. Others say the mission was aborted after the disappearance of the superior who had recruited him. Philby remained in Spain throughout the war as the Times correspondent. During World War II, the United Kingdom considered invading the Canary Islands and supporting a revolt of monarchist generals opposed to Franco, as discussed in the video about British bribes to key regime figures. Check it out if you haven't already. However, that was always a last resort, in case the Caudillo formally joined the war on the Axis side. Between 1945 and 1947, it was the United States that contemplated getting rid of Franco. But when the idea was brought to the British, they rejected it, fearing it would trigger unpredictable instability that the Soviets could exploit to install the Communist Party in power in Spain. There were even internal discussions among Falangists about killing Franco. A faction viewed him as a usurper of José Antonio Primo de Rivera's party, who had betrayed its ideals, which, to be fair, is true. They were led by Emilio Rodríguez Tarducci, founder of the Spanish military union that helped plan the 1936 coup, and by Patricio González de Canales, secretary of the clandestine Authentic Spanish Falange founded in 1939. At Tarducci's home, he and 4 other prominent Falangists met to decide whether to kill Franco during his visit to a theater on April 1st, 1941. 4 voted against and 1 abstained, after weighing the potentially disastrous consequences like a Nazi invasion, the destruction of their faction, or the collapse of the Spanish state built by the victors of the war. They also suspected they were being spied on, and probably were, since one of them, Juan Bautista Pérez de Cabo, was soon arrested for black market trading and executed. He served as both scapegoat for regime corruption and a warning to dissident Falangists. Disillusioned by the Allies' refusal to topple Franco and facing growing repression, anarchists launched new assassination attempts. The more concentrated power is in one man, the greater the impact of removing him. So many saw it as an effective way to bring down the dictatorship, especially since there was no clear successor who could ensure its continuity. According to Enrique Marco Nadal, the Secretary General of the Anarcho-Syndicalist CNT between 1946 and 1947, there were even contacts with aristocrats who wanted to use the anarchists to rid Spain of the dictator and restore the monarchy. Marco Nadal and his comrades obtained about 100 kilos of explosives in France, which they planned to plant beneath the Ministry of the Interior and the Francoist Cortes. They had located the site, but the plan ended when Marco Nadal was arrested and sentenced to death, later commuted to 20 years in prison. In 1947, upon learning that Franco would be traveling through Catalonia and visiting the mines of Sallent, the anarchists organized a 50-man guerrilla unit funded by the libertarian Laureano Cerrada. Cerrada was a master forger of currency, bills, and documents, a smuggler and arms dealer who had even pulled off a major robbery in Paris in 1944 to finance the resistance against the Nazis. His life remains full of mystery, but it's fascinating and worthy of an entire episode of its own. So, if you would like me to cover it, let me know in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. In the Sallent operation, the anarchists wanted to plant mines along the road where Franco's convoy would pass and to attack with machine guns and mortars, using tactics similar to those of the French resistance. The plan failed when one of the participants, Domènec Ibars, mistook some of his comrades for civil guards in the fog and opened fire. The noise alerted the Francoist forces, who immediately cancelled the outing. Days later, feeling guilty, Domènec Ibars joined another anarchist plan to kill the dictator, this time during a parade in Barcelona. They were armed with bombs, pistols, and submachine guns, but when they saw the large number of children present, they decided to abort the mission, unwilling to cause the deaths of innocent civilians. Incidentally, in October 1940, Domènec Ibars and a companion happened by chance upon the convoys of Franco and Hitler during their famous meeting in Andai. They suddenly had a golden opportunity to kill two fascist dictators and change the course of World War II. They managed to bypass 3 layers of security, but the final cordon around the train station was impenetrable, making it impossible to throw their bombs with any chance of success. On September 12, 1948, Laureano Cerrada used his fortune to buy a small plane, registered under the name of Georges Fontenis, secretary of the French Anarchist Federation. 3 trusted comrades were to carry out the mission, including Antonio Ortiz Ramirez, who had commanded an anarcho-syndicalist column during the Civil War and fought in the anti-Nazi resistance. Their plan was to drop bombs stolen from the Nazis onto a boat from which Franco was presiding over a boat race in San Sebastián. In previous years, several small planes had flown over the boats during the event, so they hoped theirs would go unnoticed. They took off from the French Basque country and reached the coast. However, in addition to 2 torpedo boats at sea, 6 Spanish Air Force fighters suddenly appeared, with no other planes around. The anarchists had been spotted by radar. The pilot suggested climbing to maximum altitude and dropping the bombs from there, but no one could predict where they would land. In the end, the group decided to evade the pursuing fighters and quickly re-entered French airspace. The only reason the fighters didn't shoot them down was that the anarchists hadn't had time to conceal the plane's registration and flag, as Laureano had intended. Some speculated that the mission failed to do a tip-off, but official documents confirmed that the Francoist authorities had no idea about the French plane's intentions. In fact, they speculated it might have belonged to Basque nationalists conducting flight maneuvers. Since the group still had explosives left and didn't want their efforts to go to waste, they planned a second bombing attempt for the next day. The idea was to bomb Franco's Summer Palace at night, the same one other anarchists will attack in 1962, as we will see later. But torrential rain made takeoff impossible. The wheels were stuck in the mud, and the runway was completely flooded. The operation was cancelled. In 1949, the anarchist action group known as Los Maños sought revenge, as many of its members were orphans of people executed under Franco. One of them planted a bomb in the Barcelona cathedral, which the Caudillo was scheduled to visit. However, rough seas delayed his arrival, and the bomb exploded before he got there. That same year, they successfully robbed a bank in Madrid to raise the 200,000 pesetas demanded by a military officer who promised to deliver blueprints of the El Pardo Palace, Franco's residence. But the officer never showed up. Later, a police informant infiltrated the group, leading to the arrest or death of most of its members. On July 28, 1949, after the City Council of Ponferrada awarded Franco a medal, Kim the attendant came closest to killing him since the events before the July 18th coup. An unidentified group of guerrillas opened fire on the convoy in the mountains of El Bierzo, wounding several bodyguards. Franco, however, was unharmed. He was traveling in a bulletproof Mercedes-Benz given to him by Adolf Hitler. It was extremely difficult to assassinate Franco because he was deeply paranoid about his safety and obsessively cautious, typical behavior for a dictator with countless deaths on his conscience. His public appearances always mobilized thousands of men executing meticulous security plans. He was protected by land, sea, and air. Exile, Francoist repression of the opposition, aided by effective police infiltration, and the international recognition of the regime made the 1950s a barren, lost decade for assassination attempts against Franco. On one occasion, Franco himself put his life in danger. On December 24, 1961, he went pigeon hunting in the hills of El Pardo. His shotgun exploded, seriously injuring him, especially his left hand, where he suffered fractures and lost much of the nerve and muscle tissue. The official press portrayed the incident as minor, but in reality he was incapacitated for months, unable to sleep even with painkillers. The cast was removed in April 1962, and he didn't regain full use of his left hand until autumn. Some have suggested sabotage, but the investigation concluded that a smaller caliber cartridge had somehow found its way into Franco's ammunition pocket. When he loaded it, the shell remained lodged in the barrel and detonated, and when he fired the next shot, the gun exploded. Despite the accident, it didn't stop him from spending nearly every weekend hunting. He was pretty lazy as a dictator. The incident, together with the strikes in northern Spain in the spring of 1962, undermined the aura of invincibility and immortality surrounding both the regime and its caudillo, reigniting discussions about succession. In 1961, the Spanish libertarian movement approved the creation of Defensa Interior to revive the anti-Francoist struggle and open Pandora's box of the Spanish issue at an international level. It arose mainly from the pressure of young Spanish migrants or children of exiles, who were fed up with the inaction and pessimism of the anti-Francoist opposition. And it was formed despite legitimate concerns that it could jeopardize the legal status of libertarian organizations in France. Octavio Alberola, the son of anarchist exiles in Mexico, exerted a strong influence among young people, inspired by Fidel Castro's armed struggle and the success of overthrowing Batista, as well as by leftist student movements in Europe and the US. One of Defensa Interior's main goals was to assassinate Franco. They raised funds and carefully studied the dictator's travel routes to choose the best spot for an attack. They planned a bombing near the Palace of Ayete in San Sebastián, where the dictator spent several weeks on vacation, emulating certain former kings. The anarchist team posed as a group of friends hiking and spending the summer in the area. They brought a detonation device from France, and the smuggled explosives were obtained from a newly formed Basque Nationalist terrorist organization, ETA. Two French anarchists planted the device along the road leading to the palace. A cable connected it to a detonator and a receiver, and it had to be installed shortly before the Caudillo's arrival because the device's battery only lasted 7 days. The dictator delayed his trip, probably due to heavy rains at the time, and that caused the plan to fail. As the battery ran out, they safely detonated the 20 kilos of explosives when no one was nearby, on August 19, 1962. The lucky Franco arrived at the palace 2 days later. It was one of the best prepared attempts, and among those most likely to succeed had the timing worked out, since even the police weren't aware of the operation. A few days earlier, they had set off a bomb in the Valley of the Fallen in Madrid to distract attention from their more ambitious operation, and had distributed flyers that read, "Franco, not even in your tomb will you rest easy." After an attack on the feared General Directorate of Security, or DGS, another attempt to kill Franco in Madrid was aborted when the explosives were seized and many were arrested, including Francisco Granados and Joaquín Delgado, who were executed for the DGS bombings in which they had not actually participated. It is almost certain that Jacinto Guerrero, a collaborator of Defensa Interior, was a police informant who reported on the anarchist movements. Octavio Alberola, who passed away only a few months ago, often spoke about the assassination attempts he took part in, and for that reason he became the most recognizable face of these plots. But as I mentioned, he wasn't the one who came closest to killing Franco. Internationally, the most famous assassination attempt was the one involving a young Scottish anarchist named Stuart Christie, who, inspired by the stories of neighbors who had fought in the international brigades and by the execution of Granados and Delgado, wanted to do his part to help end a fascist dictatorship that had caused so much suffering. Unlike the 1962 Ayate Palace plot, the execution of this plan was botched from the start. Christie traveled to Paris to meet with the Spanish members of Defensa Interior, and after picking up the explosives and detonators, he crossed the Pyrenees. The original plan was to detonate a bomb at the spot where Franco's motorcade would park during the Copa del Generalissimo held at the Santiago Bernabéu Stadium on July 5, 1964. However, Christie was called up in August instead, most likely because the priority was to move the explosives to a safe location in Spain and later plan the assassination. None of that happened, because when the Scotsman went to pick up a letter with instructions to deliver to the person who would carry out the attack, he was arrested near the DGS headquarters in Madrid. The Spanish Gestapo already knew what was happening because the British and French police had tracked Christie's movements and passed the information to Franco's regime, as the director of the DGS later told him during interrogation. It made no difference whether it was a parliamentary democracy or a dictatorship. They all shared the defense of the capitalist order. Moreover, the Francoist police had infiltrators and informants within the libertarian movement, which was easy given the open nature of their organizations. Perhaps what most gave him away and alerted the authorities was that the naive young Scot had made the huge mistake of appearing a few days earlier on a BBC television program featuring anarchists, during which he let slip that Spain would do well to rid itself of Franco. The host turned out to be a Catholic fundamentalist and MI6 informant. 4 days after his arrest, Christie was taken as bait to the location where he was supposed to meet his Spanish contact, Fernando Carballo Blanco. Because he was a foreigner, Christie was not physically tortured, but he was forced to witness Carballo's torture. Carballo was sentenced to 30 years in prison, while Christie received 20. Thanks to international pressure, however, he served only 3 years. This was the last anarchist plot to end the dictator's life. After numerous failures, Defensa Interior was dissolved, leaving behind a total of 1 dead and 35 wounded from its bombings. The lack of resources, the infiltrations and police crackdowns in Spain and France, the inactivity and bureaucratization of the Spanish libertarian movement in French exile, and the collaboration of its do-nothing leaders with the French government's demands brought the armed struggle to an end. The last story I have saved technically shouldn't be included in this episode according to its author's own words, but it's still worth telling. The protagonist is Joseba Elosegui, a militant of the Basque Nationalist Party who had been an officer of the Republican forces in Basque Country, where he personally witnessed the bombing of Guernica. He could never forget what he saw there. Many years later, in 1970, Elosegui decided to set himself on fire during a Basque Pelota championship in San Sebastián, shouting "Gora Euskadi Askatatua, long live a free Basque country." The problem was that he was only allowed to sit in the upper stands, while the dictator was sitting below. The distance was considerable, and he had to leap from the upper tier to get close to the Caudillo. Between that and the tight security that always surrounded Franco, the action was doomed to fail. But the Basque nationalist doused his clothes in alcohol and went through with it anyway. Some policemen managed to intercept him and extinguish the flames before he could reach the dictator. Elosegui survived and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. In his diary, he wrote that he hadn't intended to kill Franco, but to make him feel, in his own flesh, the fire that destroyed Guernica. These are the main assassination attempts against Francisco Franco's life, though there were many more that have been lost to history. Many paid dearly for their role in these failed plots, or for their leftist activism, giving their lives or freedom for a greater noble cause, restoring liberties for the Spanish people. They didn't manage to eliminate Franco, but ETA did manage to take out his right-hand man and successor, Admiral Luis Carrero Blanco. Thus, Franco lived to see how his dictatorship and legacy will struggle to survive after his death. If you learned something new, give the video a like and subscribe to the YouTube channel and podcast New History of Spain. You can support my historical work through donations or by becoming a Patreon, where you will get perks like being listed in the credits or receiving an exclusive t-shirt. Below in the description you will find links to all that and more. Thanks for making it this far, and see you soon.